What's the alternative? That's a question that I revisit often in my life. And to explain this, let me give you some context. So I've been fostering this dog from the LA County shelter. And as part of that, I've been wanting to provide training. So essentially she can, be more adoptable for her forever home, right? And as part of this training, I've been meeting with various trainers and stuff like that to, see if they're a good fit, learn from them and so forth. And there's been a few trainers that have essentially just identified all the things that I'm doing incorrectly and so forth. And what it really comes down to is, to do it properly, you have to spend so much money, so much time, and so forth, right? By their estimation, it'd be like I'd be training the dog 12 hours a day, nonstop, yada, 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 right? And it kind of speaks to this notion of kind of experts in general, where whenever you're doing consultation, it's like they tell you, okay, here's how you should do it, blah, 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 right? And it's like, okay, I get that. I get this is like the ideal, right? We're going to call that the ideal. But, in lack of that, what are the ways in which I can accomplish this in a way that is, let's say, at least satisfactory under my ideal conditions, right? Because, even like with some of the trainers, they're like, a dog like this needs to, have space to really run around in a backyard and stuff like that, essentially shaming me that I live in an apartment. It's like, listen, at the end of the day, I want to find a forever home that fits those ideals. But the reason, going back to the initial question, what's the alternative, right? Because the alternative in this instance is one of two things. Either she's still at the shelter, or she's been put down because the shelter got overcrowded, right? And that's my big thing, is oftentimes we prevent any action simply because it's not the ideal, right? And you can extrapolate this beyond just fostering a dog or so forth, but I use this because it's a simplification of that aspect. It's a very illustratable thing, and it's like, listen, again, in lieu of all the perfect conditions, is the dog still loved? Is it better than she would have at the current moment than she was at the shelter? And if those answers are yes, then again, what's the alternative? Well, if that's the alternative, then this is better than that, right? And it frustrates me when I see experts essentially just freeze people into inaction simply because they don't have X, Y, and Z. And switching it more towards art, I've been criticized of, well, why don't I hire a DP for my films? Or why don't I get an editor for my movies? And it's like, listen, that would be wonderful, sure. But, if this is the budget that I have to work with, and even though I'm not the greatest DP, and sure, there are better editors out there than me, or at least, if anything, they could provide a fresh perspective to the footage than I can, it's like I will forego those things because my goal is to make the movie, right? And the alternative is not making the movie, which is not a choice for me, right? Like that's already off the table. So for me, it's like, okay, yes, here's the ideal way to make a movie, but with what I got, how can I accomplish that, right? And, when I work with people in any capacity, as a coach or a consultant, or just an ongoing, someone who's hired to do some work, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, what are you trying to really achieve? Okay, yes, there's going to be pros and cons and give and takes. That's just life, by the way, right? And how do we accomplish what you're going for with what you got, right? And that to me is how an expert should really approach anything. You know? Yes, you can start off by, this is the ideal, this is what, in the perfect world, how it would work and how we would achieve this. Okay, we don't have that, so let's finagle, right? Because going back to that question, what's the alternative? It's inaction. Or in the case of, the dog, the alternative is she's either in the shelter, which is not great, but at least better than her being put down because the shelter got overcrowded. Right? And so if anything, this is essentially a call to arms that if your heart's in the right place, in terms of anything, and you go about it, it's better than the alternative. I really think it's a very powerful question to ask yourself of, okay, whatever it is, whatever I'm trying to do, what's the alternative? Because in life, there are no ideal conditions, and it's tough. And sometimes we feel so guilty. Trust me, it feels very shameful to have someone essentially berate me of like that the dog doesn't have X, Y, and Z, and that I can't dedicate all the time in the world to like train them and work with them. But it's like, again, are they loved? And so forth. Are they better off than they could have been? And even in that effect, like, would I love to keep her just in general and have more dogs? Absolutely. But what's the alternative in terms of that? That side of it, like doing too much, can paralyze you equally as the opposite. And so it's just, whether it's something noble, whether it's pursuing our dreams, whatever the case may be, small incremental steps and just trying to do the best that you can, I believe, is better than the alternative. So that's what I have for you today. I'd be very curious to know your thoughts about this. Again, you can go at it in a number of ways. I've tried to kind of thread the needle in a few different ways, but primarily the easiest one, or at least the one that's been top of my mind lately, is, through the dog foster one. But as I said, it certainly applies to art and can be extrapolated into all areas of life. And so, that's my challenge to you. How can you consider this question of what's the alternative in your life to galvanize you to take a step forward? Comment down below or hit me up on social media. Thank you as always. I truly do appreciate you, and I hope to see you next time.